Okay, let's get into it. We're doing a deep dive today on an incident that has fundamentally shaken the bedrock of trust in digital healthcare and, data privacy right here in New Zealand.
We're talking about the massive cyber incident involving ManageMyHealth.
Exactly, Manage My Health, or MMH.
Yeah.
And our mission today isn't just to, list the facts. We want to cut through the panic, meticulously look at the timeline, analyze the, frankly, terrifyingly professional motivation of the criminals, and figure out what this all means for you and the vulnerability of your most personal information.
And this is not a small-scale incident we're talking about. I mean, ManageMyHealth is a huge piece of New Zealand's health infrastructure.
It's the largest patient portal in the country, right?
It is. And the scale of this breach, it's affecting somewhere between 100,000 and 126,000 people.
Wow.
And to give that some context, MMH has about 1.8 million registered users. So, we're looking at 6, maybe 7% of their entire user base.
That 7% figure. It can sound kind of small when you say it like that in a country of 5 million. But we have to ground this in reality.
Yeah.
That is over 100,000 lives. 100,000 families who are now facing the immediate trauma and, I guess, the long-term risk of having their entire medical history just out there.
And that's the defining part of this. The stakes just couldn't be higher because this isn't your standard financial data leak.
Not credit card numbers.
No, not at all. This is health data, which, sits at the very top of the sensitivity hierarchy. The government has acknowledged this. The Minister of Health, Simeon Brown, he described the situation as deeply serious.
I remember that quote.
Yeah, and he affirmed that this kind of information is among the most personal and it needs to be protected to the highest of standards. And that severity is echoed by the industry. Cybersecurity experts calling it unacceptable. And one even described it as potentially the worst data breach that I recall seeing in New Zealand.
Wow. The worst data breach. I mean, that's a huge statement, putting it on par with or even above other national cyber incidents we've seen. And that's why we're digging in. Our goal for you, our listener, is to move beyond those headlines and really walk away with a crystal clear picture of the timeline, the actors, the response, and that bigger picture of why health data has become such a prime target for these financially motivated cybercriminals.
Really is a stark warning.
It is. So let's start at the beginning. Let's dissect that first phase of the crisis, how the compromise happened, and what that initial response looked like.
Okay, so the timeline is the first point of, I'd say, significant critique. For an incident of this magnitude, the company's reaction has been called sluggish.
Sluggish.
And that sluggishness has serious implications. So MMH was first notified of the unauthorized access by one of their partners. It was a third-party vendor.
Okay, so not an internal discovery.
No, and that was on December 30th. To their credit, they did notify the relevant authorities immediately on that same day.
So, okay, the initial discovery was prompt, but you said the response felt delayed. What happened between December 30th and, the public really grasping the scale of this?
Well, the crucial failure point seems to have happened on New Year's Eve, December 31st. MMH issued an initial public statement, and in it, they claimed the unauthorized access was contained.
Right, contained. That's a very specific word.
It is, and key details suggest that contained was more of an announcement than a technical reality at that point. A notice finally appeared on their website that afternoon on the 31st, acknowledging a breach. But critically, the site itself, the actual platform the hackers had used, was only taken offline that evening.
Wait, so there was a gap. They knew there was a breach, they said it was contained, but the door was still open for several hours.
That's exactly the window that drew severe and immediate criticism from cybersecurity experts.
I can imagine. That's a fundamental misstep. You're basically telling the public you've stopped the leak while the pipe is, still dripping. Experts must have felt they were giving attackers more time.
More time to exfiltrate data. Exactly. Even after they knew the breach was happening. The initial public framing felt very much like damage control, but the actual technical response seemed to be lagging.
So when did they actually fix the problem?
It wasn't until 3 days later, on January 3rd, that the company issued a much more comprehensive update. They said they'd successfully identified the specific vulnerability, that it was patched, and importantly, that the fix had been independently verified by external cybersecurity specialists.
Okay, so the technical fix, once they got to it, seems to have been pretty quick, but that initial delay in notification and shutdown, That's what really fueled that public and expert mistrust, right?
It absolutely set the tone for the whole response.
Let's pivot now to what was actually lost, because this is where MMH made a distinction that critics said was a clear attempt to minimize the problem. They were very keen to talk about what was not breached.
They were. MMH went to great lengths to highlight that the compromise was confined to the medical documents section of the app and not the core database.
Okay, for our listener, what is the difference? What does that distinction actually mean?
Well, a core database usually holds very structured index data. Think of it like a spreadsheet. Your name is in one column, linked to your GP in another, your address, maybe a list of prescribed medications. It's very neat.
But the documents section is different.
Very different. The documents section holds unstructured data, and that is often far, far more dangerous when it's compromised.
Why is that?
Because it's essentially just a digital filing cabinet. It's a repository of files uploaded by doctors, labs, or even patients themselves. We're talking about PDFs, scans, images. These are often massive data dumps that contain narratives, diagnoses, and personal context that would never fit into a neat little database field.
So the hackers claim to have, what, 400,000 documents?
That's their claim, and given the estimated 126,000 affected users, that suggests multiple files were stolen for each person.
So let's get specific. What kind of sensitive files are we actually talking about here?
We are talking about the raw essence of a patient's life. The dataset included clinical notes.
Which are?
These are detailed, often narrative records written by your GP or a specialist. They describe your health conditions, lifestyle factors, mental health status, very sensitive diagnoses. Alongside that, you had lab results, vaccination records, and all the standard stuff, what we call personally identifiable information, or PII.
Names, birth dates, addresses.
Exactly. Emails, phone numbers. That PII alone is enough to enable pretty serious identity theft. But as you said, the files went much deeper. They included passport details. A passport number, especially when you pair with a name and a date of birth, I mean, that's the gold standard for high-level identity fraud.
So criminals could create synthetic identities, apply for loans in your name?
All of that. But then you get to the truly invasive material. The compromised files contain photographs of people unclothed.
Unclothed.
Yes, likely images taken by dermatologists or other specialists to track skin conditions, for example. And then there were extremely delicate psychological documents. We're talking about full ADHD assessments and private notes from a psychiatrist.
My goodness. That level of detail, it just transforms this from a simple data leak into a personal and potentially weaponizable dossier on someone.
Absolutely.
These files contain details that, if they were made public, could expose deep vulnerabilities, family secrets, or even cause severe professional problems for an individual. It puts the patient in a position where they could be extorted. It's far worse than a financial crime.
It creates leverage, not just debt. When a criminal has documented proof of a sensitive medical condition or highly personal images, the crime shifts from theft to terror.
And that distinction, stolen medical records versus a stolen credit card number, that's got to be the reason experts were calling this one of the worst breaches in New Zealand's history.
It is. The potential for human harm is just orders of magnitude greater.
Knowing what they took, we have to look at who took it. That kind of exposure forces the question, who is actually behind this, and why on earth did they target New Zealand health records? Let's move our focus to the criminal group known as Kazu and their, for lack of a better term, business model.
Kazu is the name the criminal group operates under. Their location is, as you'd expect, unknown. They communicate mostly through encrypted channels on the dark web or directly with the companies they target. But what really sets Kazu apart is their highly professionalized, almost corporate approach to cybercrime.
Right, and that professionalism started with their ransom demand. It was described as a lowball ransom, only $60,000. That seems low for this much data. Why so little?
It's a fascinating tactic, isn't it? The analysis suggests the $60,000 was a highly opportunistic fee. They may have figured that $60,000 is small enough that a medium-sized company might just pay it quickly to make the problem go away.
Especially over the holiday period.
Exactly, just to avoid the internal costs and legal exposure. It's a quick, high-certainty payout rather than a long, risky negotiation for a massive sum. It's a volume business for them.
And they didn't wait around. They escalated the pressure almost immediately.
They did. The original payment deadline was January 15th, but Kazu dramatically brought it forward to Tuesday morning, January 6th at 5 a.m. And they were explicit about why. They said it was a deliberate tactic to put pressure on the company. They actually complained that MMH's ignorance of our emails and messages, along with their failure to acknowledge users or explain exactly what happened, is the main issue.
So wait, Kazu wasn't just reacting to them not paying, they were reacting to the company's PR and communication strategy.
It seems so. They were effectively using their leverage to try and force MMH into a public statement and a faster resolution on their terms.
That's chilling, and it ties directly into their motivation, which they were very clear about. They said they are not a hacktivist group with political motives.
Right. They aren't trying to protest a government policy or make a political statement. Their entire purpose is framed as a pure business venture.
A for-profit enterprise. It's dedicated to exploiting security failures for maximum financial gain. But what's their ultimate business goal, beyond just this one $60,000 payday?
Well, their main goals are money, obviously, but also, and this is the bizarre part, building a good reputation in the community.
The criminal community.
The dark web ecosystem of ransomware brokers and buyers, yes. They claim they've had recent success extracting ransoms from healthcare companies in Asia and Africa, which sort of validates their model. And their core product, their guarantee, is their promise. If you pay us, we'll send you a copy of the data, delete it from our servers, and we will never post anything related to the company again.
A trustworthy criminal. It sounds like satire, but it's a terrifyingly logical concept in that world. Why is that brand reputation so important to them?
Because the ransomware market is flooded with scammers. People who take the money and leak the data anyway. By guaranteeing a data deletion, which is verifiable, because the data won't pop up later on the dark web, Kazu, establishes a reliable track record.
So future victims will look at them and think, okay, these guys are criminals, but they're reliable criminals.
Exactly. They'll calculate that paying the ransom is the path of least resistance. This reliability allows them to charge higher prices or get paid faster in the future.
But they threatened to leak the New Zealand data for free if the ransom wasn't paid. So they were willing to abandon the financial gain here. Why? This is where it gets really interesting.
That is precisely the expert analysis. They are sacrificing the immediate financial return on this specific New Zealand dataset to gain long-term credibility.
It's a marketing expense.
It's pure brand management. They threaten to leak it to prove our claims, and in their own words, to increase the chances of successful future deals. They're using this New Zealand incident to make an example out of ManageMyHealth. The data leak becomes a demonstration to much larger, wealthier targets in other markets that Kazu always follows through on its threats.
So the 126,000 victims in New Zealand are essentially just collateral damage in a global ransomware marketing campaign.
That's a very good way of putting it.
So that's the motivation. But what about the sophistication of the attack itself? Was this some elite state-sponsored group that took months of planning?
No, the consensus among experts is the exact opposite. They suggest the MMH attack was likely low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, maybe only a couple of days' work for a couple of people.
Yeah.
This was not the work of an elite hacking crew. The reality of modern cybercrime is that these groups aren't usually looking for some brilliant, undiscovered zero-day exploit. They're just looking for common, known vulnerabilities that have been left unpatched.
So what does low-hanging fruit actually look like in a system like this? Can you give us an example?
Sure. It could be something as straightforward as a web application that's running outdated software with a known published vulnerability. Maybe a weak spot that allows something called SQL injection, or maybe a server was configured with default admin passwords that were just never changed.
So basic stuff.
Very basic. In many cases, it's a lack of a strong perimeter defense, or, as we'll talk about later, a failure to implement simple multi-factor authentication. These criminals run automated scripts that just scan the entire internet 24/7 for these basic flaws. If they find a vulnerability within a few hours, they exploit it. If not, they move on. The fact that Kazu got in suggests MMH's systems simply lack the foundational cyber hygiene to deter these kinds of high-volume, low-effort attacks.
That makes the whole thing feel so tragically preventable, and that brings us directly to the systemic response. We need to look at what the company, the government, and the overall accountability structure did next.
Let's start with the government's hard line on the ransom itself. Minister Brown reinforced New Zealand's long-standing position that ransom should not be paid.
And that's pretty standard across most Western governments, right?
It is, for two main reasons. First, paying just validates the criminal business model and, it incentivizes more attacks. And second, there's a risk that the money could directly or indirectly fund groups or even states that are under international sanctions, which would create huge legal problems for the company that pays.
And the Minister of Health, Simeon Brown, he was absolutely clear about where the ultimate responsibility lies here, even while his government was offering support.
He was unwavering on that point. He called the hack unacceptable and stressed that any entity, public or private, that holds citizen data has a non-negotiable responsibility to protect it to the highest standards.
He specifically said ManageMyHealth is ultimately responsible under the Privacy Act.
He did, responsible for managing the breach, containing the fallout, and correctly notifying all the affected patients.
But the government didn't just leave MMH to handle it alone. They did offer a lot of support, correct?
Absolutely. The response was quite centralized. An interagency incident management team was set up immediately, and they were working around the clock in close cooperation with MMH.
So who was on that team?
It involved key government agencies like Health NZ and the Ministry of Health. They were providing technical, strategic, and communication support, and that quick, unified government response was really intended to ensure the crisis management was efficient and, focused on patient safety.
And the minister's direct involvement, speaking to the CEO, that says a lot about the severity of the situation.
It does. He confirmed he spoke directly with the MMH CEO and made the government's expectations incredibly clear about transparency, speed, and working with the agencies. And crucially, they got early advice confirming that the breach was isolated to the MMH platform.
So there was no impact on Health NZ's internal core system.
Right, which must have been a huge relief. It eased fears of a much deeper government-wide systems compromise.
Beyond the operational side, MH also tried a legal move to stop Kazu from leaking the data.
They did. MMH filed papers in the High Court in Wellington seeking an injunction.
Which is a court order to prevent.
To prevent the public use, sharing, or publication of the stolen patient data. Now, getting an injunction against an anonymous, globally operating criminal group is functionally very difficult.
Of course.
But the action is still important legally. It shows the company is taking every available step to minimize harm. And it helps establish a legal precedent in New Zealand against publishing stolen private health records.
Okay, now we have to get to the most heavily criticized part of the company's response. That painfully slow notification process. MMH said they knew who was affected, but they couldn't tell them right away. Why the delay?
This is a real deep dive into the legal and, frankly, bureaucratic complexities of digital health data. MMH stated they had identified all 126,000 affected patients, but they couldn't give a definite timeline for notification. They were only aiming for an update by Tuesday.
And the delay wasn't just technical.
No, it was about legal coordination.
So why did it require a whole multi-agency coordination? Just send an email telling someone their data was stolen.
Because of the tangled web of data ownership and processing. The compromised documents, you have to remember, came from multiple sources. GPs, various hospitals, specialty clinics. These entities, along with the Ministry of Health and Health NZ, are often considered the data controllers.
Meaning they determine what happens with the data.
Right. They determine the purpose and means of processing it. MMH is the data processor, the company holding and servicing that data on their behalf. And the Privacy Act, along with the Health Information Privacy Code, assigns specific legal obligations to both the controllers and the processors during a breach.
So if MMH had just sent out the notification on their own, they might have accidentally violated the legal obligations of the GPs who originally created the clinical notes.
Precisely. They needed complex coordination with the Ministry of Health, Health NZ, the Privacy Commissioner, and GPNZ, that's General Practice New Zealand, to ensure all the legal requirements were met.
I see.
And they also claimed this was necessary to prevent patient confusion, to avoid having 5 different organizations contact the same person about the same traumatic incident. But while the rationale for coordination is sound, the extended delay fueled immense frustration.
And the public reaction was that MMH was trying to downplay the catastrophe by focusing on that 7% user statistic and stressing that the core database wasn't touched.
They were. And it effectively buried the fact that the stolen files were the worst kind of sensitive data imaginable. That perceived minimization just eroded trust so quickly.
It suggested a communication strategy that was more about protecting the company's reputation than, prioritizing the immediate mental and emotional safety of the 126,000 victims.
Exactly. Who needed to be told what was stolen and what steps they should take to protect themselves? That slow notification directly contradicted the clear expectations the minister had set.
So, given the systemic failure, the government didn't just trust them to fix it themselves. They mandated a formal, independent review.
And this is a critical development for New Zealand's entire health sector. Minister Brown commissioned a formal Ministry of Health review set to start by the end of January 2026. And importantly, the ministry is covering the cost.
Which is a tacit admission that this is a systemic problem, right?
Yes, an acknowledgement that lessons need to be learnt for the public good, not just for one company.
And the purpose of the review was clearly defined. It's not just about blaming MMH, is it?
No, it has a systemic focus laid out with 3 explicit objectives. The first is operational. Assess the actual technical cause of the incident. The second is structural. Review the adequacy of the data protections that were in place and the response to the incident.
And the third?
The third, and most forward-looking, is to recommend any improvements required across the entire sector to prevent similar incidents from happening again.
But the minister was clear that the review couldn't get in the way of the immediate crisis management.
That was the crucial caveat. He noted it was important that the review does not distract from the immediate response to the incident. They needed to put the fire out first, but the mandate for a comprehensive government-led postmortem was set firmly in place.
Okay, we've talked about the attack, the attacker, and the response. It is absolutely vital now that we pivot to the human element. Let's focus on the long-term devastating impact on those 126,000 people whose data is now out there.
This shift in focus is essential because this is where the trauma is. Experts are warning that the affected people are now facing a dual-threat landscape. The risks are both financial and intensely personal.
Let's start with the financial side, which is the more common crime, identity theft.
Right, because the thieves got the full PII names, addresses, birth dates, phone numbers, and most critically, those passport details. These individuals are now extremely high-value targets. This data is sufficient for very sophisticated identity theft.
Meaning criminals can do what with it?
They can open accounts, apply for credit, or even create synthetic identities that combine real and fake data, leading to years of credit score damage and an incredibly complex financial cleanup for the victims.
But the truly terrifying threat, it goes back to the specifics of those documents, the clinical notes and photos. This is the risk of personal extortion and blackmail.
This is the risk that keeps security experts up at night. The presence of highly sensitive medical photos, detailed clinical notes, psychological assessments. It provides a kind of leverage that money alone can't buy.
How so?
A criminal can target an individual based on a specific vulnerability they find in the stolen records, a secret diagnosis, a private image, an embarrassing condition, and demand payment to keep that information private.
It's a completely different emotional dynamic than finding out your credit card number was used to buy a TV online. This is psychological terror.
Exactly. And we heard this specific concern from one of the patients quoted in the news. Will someone blackmail people? Or try to extort them personally as well if they don't pay up? That's the core difference.
Yeah.
In a financial breach, your money is stolen. In this health breach, your peace of mind and your personal reputation are held for ransom. The stakes have lifetime implications.
And we have a very stark, very real-world parallel for this just across the Tasman in Australia, the Medibank ransomware attack.
That is the cautionary tale we have to look at. In 2022, the Medibank incident exposed health records, and the fallout was immediate and disastrous. That breach resulted in many thousands, some reports say even hundreds of thousands, of real financial crimes against the people affected. History shows us that when a large health data set is leaked, it immediately translates into targeted social engineering, harassment, and financial loss for the victims.
So the temptation for MMH to just pay that $60,000 ransom to protect its users must have been immense, especially given the potential for that kind of targeted blackmail.
It is an agonizing calculation. Kazu offers this sweet deal, pay us, and we delete the data. But there is absolutely zero enforceable guarantee that they'll honor that promise.
Right.
They could easily sell copies before deleting it, or, as you said, decide to contact individuals privately for a second round of extortion, knowing how vulnerable they are. And then there's the legal complexity. Paying the ransom might violate New Zealand or international law if Kazu is linked to a country under economic sanctions.
So the government's official stance, do not pay criminals, it's rooted in both pragmatic risk assessment and just following the law.
It is?
And meanwhile, the patients are just caught in the middle. They rely on these systems because their GPs push them towards convenience, only to find themselves completely exposed by a systemic security flaw.
That feeling of helplessness is a major piece of the collateral damage here. One patient, who is an IT consultant himself, he summarized the dilemma perfectly. Patients feel like they have little choice but to rely on these digital portals because they're pushed by the convenience offered by their medical providers.
And now his confidence is gone.
Completely destroyed. He stated plainly, "I can't really have confidence in the system after this," and said he plans to close his account. This erosion of trust in digital health portals, which are supposed to be the future of accessible healthcare, is a severe long-term systemic cost of this breach.
This incident is just a perfect storm of basic technical failure, calculated criminal opportunism, and intensely personal exposure. Let's widen the lens now and use this to understand the broader context of the threat landscape.
Yeah, if we look at the trends identified by the National Cybersecurity Center, the NCSC, the MMH incident fits the pattern of New Zealand's current threat landscape perfectly. Their reports just reinforce this massive increase in the commercialization of cybercrime.
Can you break down the scale of that financial shift?
It's dramatic. The NCSC reported that in the 2024-25 period, over 40% of the incidents they dealt with were criminal or financially motivated.
40%.
And to put that into perspective, that figure more than doubled year over year. This isn't just teenagers in a basement anymore. This is organized crime-seeking cash flow. And the financial toll is quantified too. Losses noted in that NCSC report tally up to $21.6 million.
And they're successful because they're just industrializing this process of finding easy weaknesses.
Exactly. Finding those known vulnerabilities in unpatched systems that grant them easy access is the very definition of that low-hanging fruit Kazu was looking for.
And technology, specifically AI, is making these scalable attacks even easier for them.
Absolutely. The NCSC explicitly warns about the AI threat. AI is lowering the barrier for entry. It lets attackers launch far more convincing and highly scalable attacks than ever before.
Like what?
Think of hyper-realistic phishing emails generated in perfect local dialect, targeted specifically at healthcare employees. The danger is that the sheer volume and speed of these automated AI-driven attacks can just overwhelm traditional security teams, especially if they're weak on those fundamental protective measures, what we keep calling basic cyber hygiene.
The fact that MMH is a third-party provider, a separate company in the healthcare supply chain, that seems to be a systemic vulnerability in itself.
It's increasingly the trend. The NCSC has identified targeting third-party suppliers or supply chain attacks as a major trend. And it's because these external vendors often don't adhere to the same stringent security standards as the primary target organization, in this case, Health NZ or the Ministry of Health.
So the attacker just targets the weaker link.
Right. They know that once they compromise the third party, they often gain access to the data sets they couldn't touch directly. MMH is a textbook example of this vulnerability.
And to give our listeners some context, let's compare MMH to other major New Zealand incidents. The Waikato DHB attack was probably more disruptive, but how does MMH compare in terms of the security failure?
The Waikato DHB attack in 2021, that remains the benchmark for operational paralysis. That ransomware attack brought 5 hospitals to a standstill for weeks. They were forced back to pen and paper. And it ultimately leaked data from over 4,000 patients and employees.
And the critical security failure there was?
It was systemic. The DHB had been warned only months before about its outdated security infrastructure, including clinical devices running obsolete operating systems like Windows XP and significant problems with patch management.
So a lack of basic maintenance and a failure to heed warnings directly led to the catastrophe. It's a systemic failure very similar in principle to MMH's low-hanging fruit vulnerability.
Exactly. The lesson is identical. Systemic failure and ignored warnings pave the way for successful attacks. In contrast, you look at the Latitude financial breach in 2023. That was the biggest breach in terms of sheer volume.
14 million documents, right?
Over 14 million documents, including over 1 million New Zealand driver licenses and passport details. And while Latitude's breach was catastrophic for identity fraud, the MMH breach is uniquely sensitive because of the medical nature of the data. It just elevates the risk of that personal blackmail.
We also had the NZX attacks.
The NZX incident in 2020 was a different mechanism entirely. A distributed denial of service, or DDoS, attack. It didn't steal data, but it crippled the New Zealand Stock Exchange, halting trading for nearly a week. These DDoS attacks are often used as extreme pressure tactics to extort a ransom just to get your service back online. It just highlights the diversity of financially motivated attacks hitting our critical infrastructure.
And it's clear these supply chain attacks aren't just a local problem. We're seeing global giants get hit through their third parties.
We see this pattern everywhere. Take Qantas in 2025. They saw 5.7 million customers globally affected when data names, emails, frequent flyer details was compromised through a third-party vendor. Even Nissan suffered a hack in 2024, affecting 100,000 customers in Australia and New Zealand, which led to passports and licenses being published on the dark web. The supply chain is always the default weak point.
This terrifying consistency basic failure leading to catastrophic outcomes, it brings us to the foundational lesson. The NCSC had a case study that shows the only thing separating an organization from weeks of paralysis is often just a single, simple protective measure.
That case study is so instructive. It involved another health organization that suffered extensive encryption and data theft via ransomware, but they managed to recover quickly. And they did it by restoring their entire system from backups that had been completed just 1 hour before the ransomware activity began.
So robust, frequent backups literally saved them from collapse. But how did the hacker even get past the front door in the first place?
The critical point of failure was the lack of multi-factor authentication, or MFA.
MFA.
The hacker gained initial access because they only needed a single, probably compromised password. Had MFA been in place, requiring a password plus a second verification like a code sent to your phone, the initial access would have been denied. The whole ransomware execution would have been stopped cold.
So the vulnerability was simple. A freshman mistake, really. But the only thing that saved them from weeks of paralysis was an excellent backup system. It just hammers home the lesson that the vast majority of these huge, expensive breaches are preventable by adhering to basic foundational cyber hygiene. So what does this all mean? We've walked through the catastrophic exposure of 126,000 patient records, the high-stakes business model of the criminal group Kazu, and the agonizing response that followed.
It means we have to recognize the shifting value of data. The core insight here is the extremely high value of health data. It's not just money being stolen anymore, it's leverage for lifetime extortion. And secondly, we've confirmed that cybercrime is now a professionalized global industry where criminal brand management is a crucial factor in their success. Kazu's willingness to leak data for free is an investment for them, not a mistake.
And fundamentally, this incident just hammers home the critical need for third-party providers like MMH, who are entrusted with this kind of personal information, to be held accountable to the absolute highest security standards. This crisis has clearly shown that relying solely on their own financial incentive or technical diligence is just not enough when the public's most sensitive health records are at stake.
And the government's proactive response in mandating that thorough, cost-covered review is crucial. It's an acknowledgement that lessons have to be learned on a systemic level. The focus now must remain on ensuring the findings of that Ministry of Health review are implemented quickly to prevent any future repeat of a low-hanging fruit attack that exposes the public to identity crime, blackmail, and extortion.
This entire deep dive has focused on why this catastrophe happened and what basic steps, like multi-factor authentication, could have prevented it. The government review is focused on assessing the cause and recommending preventative improvements. But this raises the most important question for you, the listener, to consider long after we wrap up this conversation.
Given that experts noted the MMH attack was likely caused by exploiting low-hanging fruit, these very basic vulnerabilities, and given the catastrophic consequences of failure involving the public's most sensitive medical data, should the protection of this information rely solely on the financial incentives or the technical diligence of private companies?
Or does the critical nature of health information mandate a baseline level of government regulatory oversight on security protocols? Things like mandatory multi-factor authentication for all access points, standardized patch management, or independent third-party audits of all health data custodians, just to ensure the public's trust and safety. Is it time for mandatory minimum standards for all guardians of our health data?
That is the crucial policy challenge now facing New Zealand, balancing innovation and convenience in digital health with the absolute mandate for robust protection in the age of commercialized, highly motivated cybercrime.
Absolutely. Think about that next time your GP suggests you check your lab results via an online portal. We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.